Hi, good morning. This is Gene. I originally was going to go Facebook Live, but I've been having trouble with Facebook Live lately. It's been not recording and it's not posting. Anyway, this is just, I'm doing an exercise and it's called riffing and ranting. And so basically, what I want to do is I want to try to extract whatever value I think I have that I can deliver to my avatars. And instead of just trying to write it down, I'm just going to try to go unscripted and talk about topics that I feel very passionately about. And then I'm recording it. And then I will extract the audio, I will send it off to be transcribed. And hopefully that'll be content that I can then kind of readjust as far as my masterclass program, my mastermind program, topics that really can help people who are doing business in China. So, what I'm doing is I'm launching a mastermind to help China expats do a couple things. But I think I describe it as help them discover hidden advantages within the nuances of Chinese culture by developing the awareness to expose its weaknesses. Okay, so that is really in one sentence, and that was really a challenge to describe what I'm going to deliver to you if you are one of my avatars. Okay, so one of the questions that you may ask or the questions you may have is what is the biggest challenge of communicating effectively in China? Okay, and I think the biggest challenge for most, so the context is from an American or Western point of view, the biggest challenge of communicating effectively in China is that the logic of Chinese reasoning and the way they communicate is, metaphorically speaking, it's circular. So, whatever logic and linear reasoning you may have, you're going to find it very frustrating because you're going to experience that Chinese conversations become very circular, which means that you can't seem to stay on the same topic or the same point. It means it's often difficult to get a yes or no answer because in a circular world, there is no real yes or no answers. And for you, it's going to be difficult to really get what we call actionable information when you're trying to figure out how to make a decision, and you do that by asking questions or engaging in conversation with your Chinese counterparts, whether it's an employee or a partner that you're negotiating with. That is probably the biggest challenge. Okay. And so, how do you handle Chinese communications when they're circular? Or if you're negotiating or you're trying to get answers, how do you handle it when what you're experiencing is very kind of vague and non committal? So, there's really no short answer to that. But the real answer, if you want to get real results, is you have to actually develop a mindset for China business. And what does that mean? That means you really understand in the cultural context how Chinese people communicate, why they say what they say, where it originates from. Okay, what is the motivation behind them saying what they say? If they say something disingenuous, well, the motivation could be to give you face, which is another one of the things that we're going to talk about. And uh, and the thing that you really have to do is understand its origins before you pass judgment. And I think if you develop that mindset, that will help you alleviate a lot of the frustrations. Okay, but tactically, the things that we're going to get into is you have to develop skills and strategies and tactics to help you get more towards the answers that you need or the information that you need in order to make a decision. And sometimes your direct and transparent approach actually will lead to the opposite uh, outcome that you intend. You may think that being transparent, being open, being direct, and being honest is the best way to get answers. But sometimes in a circular world or in a circular mind, being direct actually isn't. And I know that's counterintuitive, but as you really start understanding the nuances of Chinese culture and what Chinese people value, you will discover that sometimes, as a tactic, you need to be deliberately vague. Okay, because by being too direct, you're either not giving face or you're actually not allowing the conversation to flow more freely. Sometimes it's also a good tactic and strategy that you need to learn how to do is you have to be deliberately silent, which means don't always feel the urgency and resist your tendency to always want to correct the record. Okay. Something is not exactly true, and then you just cannot help it that you have to set the record straight, or you have to make sure they understand that you're not going to be able to do something. That is something that you're going to have to develop the ability to resist if you want to communicate effectively. And then also it ties into kind of what is the difference between direct and indirect methods or ways of getting answers. And in China, especially if you need answers because you need to make a decision, it's better to try an indirect approach. And that'll really get into kind of what it means to give and receive face in the context of Chinese culture. Okay, so that's kind of like, the real, the essence of the biggest challenges of communicating effectively in China and how you should handle what would be considered vague and non-committal responses from your Chinese people that you're communicating with. Okay. So the next topic that I'm going to riff on is about how do you find the right partner in China? And maybe you have a question that are all Chinese people corrupt and unethical? Okay. I'm going to answer the second question first. The second question really, are Chinese people corrupt and unethical? That really depends on, number one, your definition of corruption and ethics. But number two, whether you interpret behavior in a literal sense or in a figurative sense. And is your interpretation aligned with the cultural context of the environment in which you're operating? So when you are operating in China, in a figurative sense, nothing is absolutely corrupt or unethical. Okay, that's a mindset. It's not a literal statement, it's a mindset. And what that means is in the Chinese culture that is derived from 5,000 years of continuous history and a lot of philosophies that are still in play today, dating back to Confucius and Sun Tzu and the art of war tactics and strategies that people use, and the fact that you want to maintain, or at a macro, the society is based on maintaining social harmony. And if you don't have this sense of favoritism and goodwill and reciprocity for the purposes of giving goodwill or exchanging, favorites to somebody that you have a Guanxi relationship with, then yes, it would be corrupt and unethical in your mind in the Western, very kind of direct, individualistic, institutionalized society. But in Chinese culture, it is not. And only when you start to learn to develop the ability to think about how Chinese behave in a more nuanced, culturally considerate, figurative way, then you're not going to be able to really engage with Chinese people in a way which is the beginning question, how do you find the right partner and how do you develop the right strategic win-win partnerships? Okay. If everything is transactional, then you're never going to be able to lead it's never going to lead you to the outcomes that you want to achieve. And if everything is transactional, and you don't develop real Guanxi relationships, which is an absolute necessity in Chinese culture, you're more than likely going to experience a lot of issues, and eventually the partnership is going to become dysfunctional. And the reason that this is so frustrating and surprising for most foreigners doing business in China is because the way that the Chinese culture works is everything initially is kind of, you're in this honeymoon period. Okay, you're hearing the things you want to hear. People are treating you with the utmost respect and just, really praising everything that you have to say. And then eventually that honeymoon period ends and the real business engagement begins. And if you haven't developed the Guanxi relationship or developed the mindset for China business, then you're going to experience problems. So finding the right partner is not about what are the criteria for the right partner. It's really about, do you have the right mindset to be able to figure out who is aligned with you better as far as the long-term goals, and how do you develop the right Guanxi relationship to make that partnership a flourishing success. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of my riff or rant on finding the right partners in China. Something else that always comes up, it's a little bit, I guess, related. It is, what should I do about all of this Chinese nationalism and government policies that really give my local Chinese competitors an unfair advantage? And how do I protect my intellectual property if I'm afraid it's going to be stolen, or I have to hand it over in order to do business in China? Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff going on there. And the short answer is, you really have to know the game and play the game. When you go to China, whether you go there sourcing resources to do production and manufacturing, or you're trying to sell something in that market, once you enter China, you are in, quote unquote, their arena. Okay. And when you're in that arena, you have to play by the rules that you cannot change. Okay. All of the policies, even a lot of the way that people behave and all of the cultural nuances, those are just part of the rules of the game if you want to compete in that arena. And what you should do is learn how to play by those rules. Know the game and play the game. And that is the way to leverage your competitive advantages. Okay. As a foreigner with IP, with different experiences and different thoughts and different ideas and whatever you bring to the table, those are all your unfair advantages when you go to China. But if you don't know how to play by China rules when you're in China, all those unfair advantages become disadvantages. Okay. And those are the things that you have to really understand before you think about, how do I protect my IP? Because the short answer is, you can protect it, but only if you know the game and know how to play the game. All right. So I'm going to continue riffing. Let's see what's going on now. Okay. So what is a mindset for China business? I talk about that a lot. And what do Americans and Westerners struggle with most in dealing with Chinese culture? Okay. So a mindset for China business is, in a nutshell, it basically is something that is going to be completely counterintuitive to your existing mindset. And this is especially true if you're an American, or you're British, or you're from a Western type country. And the mindset for China business, first of all, it's counterintuitive. So it's extremely, extremely difficult to develop without an open mind. But the second part about it is a mindset for China business means that when you're operating in the arena that is this huge China market, in whether you're in China or outside of China, but when you're doing business in China, you have to understand the Chinese mindset and the Chinese mentality. Okay. And you have to develop a mindset where you never feel you need to educate the Chinese or help them change their behavior or help them change their values and how they think. Okay. Because once you get into that, once you get into a position of righteousness where you think you're in a position to educate, then every conversation that you have is going to be contentious at best, but it could be very argumentative and combative, but it's just going to be completely unproductive. Okay. You have to really quantify that your number one goal or purpose for going to China is actually to accomplish some business objective. Okay. Hopefully you're not going there just as a tourist. You're going there to develop real relationships, to find the right partners, to source the right technology, to be able to sell your goods and services to the market effectively. And that all begins with a mindset for China business where you really focus on two things. You focus on empathy for what Chinese people value and how they feel. And that will get into the nuances of Guanxi relationships and all of that. And the other is you're focused on your level of awareness. And obviously there's many types of awareness. There's obviously self-awareness, how you are perceived by the people that you're communicating with in China. Cultural awareness, how your behavior actually fits within the context of the arena that is China. And then situational awareness. A lot of foreigners think they have bargaining power when they go to China, but that is becoming less and less true. So understanding the context of the situation, what your bargaining power is, what is something that you offer of value to Chinese or can offer of value to Chinese, and what you're going to discover is generally not what you think. What you think is valuable isn't what they necessarily think is valuable. And you have to be empathetic to what they value before you can leverage whatever you have to create an advantage for yourself. Okay, and just a little bit of a side note. One thing Chinese people value more than anything else is their face, their mianzi. And if you can learn how to give face in the Chinese cultural context, then you will be light years ahead of most of your other foreign competitors battling for resources, battling for mind share, battling for market share with your Chinese consumer, whatever it is. All right. So, so a lot of people say, we hear this term art of war, and it's always important to really understand. So are Chinese people using the art of war in their negotiations or in their communications? And the short answer is yes, of course they are. But to put it into context, the question becomes, are they doing it deliberately? Meaning, did they study the art of war and now they're trying to use these strategies and tactics to create an advantage for them? And the general answer is no. A lot of art of war tactics just become kind of deeply embedded in the normal way that Chinese people haggle or negotiate or communicate. It's cultural. It feels like the art of war when they're using these tactics against you, and you feel that there's all of these contradictions going on. And of course, a lot of foreigners have talked about China being the land of contradictions. Well, a lot of that can be attributed to art of war tactics and strategies at play. If you can kind of predict with certainty what they're going to say and how they're going to say it, then they lose their advantage, so to speak. Yes, the art of war tactics are in play, and they're using those, but they're not using those deliberately. And what that means is if you have a better understanding of the cultural context of how Chinese people communicate and what they value, then you too can use art of war tactics to level the playing field, so to speak. Just remember, you're in a competitive arena and you need to know the game and play the game. And if art of war tactics are the strategies that all of your other stakeholders are employing, then it would benefit you to understand them and learn how to adopt some of them yourself. Okay? Continuing on with this rant and riff. So the question then becomes, well, how do I find a Chinese partner that I can trust? What is this Guanxi that you're really always talking about? Why should I care about developing Guanxi? And how is it different than just developing relationships in American culture? Because by all definitions, we have to develop Guanxi here in the US with our partners, with our suppliers, with our stakeholders, with our customers, with our employees too. Okay. So what are the differences? Okay. So first of all, what the differences are really in the ramifications if you don't develop Guanxi relationships. Okay. Compare that to, in my case, American culture. If you don't really have Guanxi relationships, that means you're exchanging a lot of goodwill and favoritism and all of this stuff. It doesn't affect what people do as much and how people behave. In a professional environment here in the United States, we use this term, just be professional, or it's just business. And when we use those words and those phrases, it means that don't take it personal, right? You don't have to like me as a person, but we still have to do business together. Flip that over to China and just be professional. Don't take it personal. Suddenly no longer applies. The mindset that you have to develop about why it's important to develop Guanxi relationships is you have to assume that in China, everything is personal. Chinese people take everything personally. And that is because they care about their face above and beyond anything else. I mean, even beyond money. Face is the lubricant that runs the Guanxi engine in China. Okay. And that is why understanding the nuances of developing Guanxi and developing the mindset, the ramifications of not having Guanxi relationships are going to be extraordinarily more impactful or detrimental than if you didn't have the same relationship in America, for example. That really is, in a nutshell, what is Guanxi and why you should care about developing it. Okay. And finding the right China partner is all about developing the right Guanxi with the person that you're working with. Okay. Once you develop kind of the right radar, where to align. So, for example, people will say, to find a Chinese partner, you got to find somebody that shares your values. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do business with them. I don't think that's the right advice. Okay. Because if you go into China looking for a partner with the idea that you want to find somebody that shares your values, that's going to be almost like a lost cause. Okay. Just because they don't share all of your values, and they shouldn't because they grew up in a completely different environment, but just because they don't share all of your values doesn't mean they can't become extraordinarily great partners. Okay. So finding the right Chinese partner is not aligning on values, but aligning on process. And this gets into kind of a lot of art of war tactics where you have to not give away everything, not be 100% transparent, not put all your cards on the table. If you put all your cards on the table, then you got no more cards to play. You got nothing to bluff with, right? Think about it as a game of poker. You want to keep something in your whole cards or in your back pocket to leverage when you need to compel your partner to take action. Because if you put all your cards on the table and you're completely transparent and you just keep on asking linear questions and a circular conversation, you're never going to get what you want. And they're going to continue to extract information and value from you. And unbeknownst to you, you're just continuing to deliver value without getting anything in return. Okay. So that is how you find a Chinese partner you can trust, is by developing the right Guanxi relationships with someone you have aligned on process with. Okay. And that is really the start of finding the right partner. It takes a long time to find the right partner, so you have to have patience. And it takes a commitment to never stop negotiating with your partner if you want to make the partnership a success. All right. And then the final thing is, that I want to rant about today is, how do I increase retention and loyalty with my Chinese staff? And again, the answer to this question is almost the same as the answer to every question in China, and maybe the answer to finding the right partner is you have to understand what Chinese people care about and what they value. And on top of that, you have to develop real Guanxi relationships. Because in Chinese culture, people are loyal to people they have Guanxi relationships with. They aren't loyal to people that give them money or just do them favors, or will give them a lot of valuable information, or even someone who just can give them a lot of opportunities. Opportunities are transactional. Money is transactional. Guanxi is the only thing that transcends what you exchange on the surface, which means it can translate into loyalty, if that's kind of the term that you want to use. It can translate into loyalty if you develop real Guanxi relationships. And that has nothing to do with whether they're your subordinates or not. You can have Guanxi relationships with anybody, as long as you understand how to play the game in the cultural context of doing business in China. You know the rules, you know the game, and you know how to play the game. You control your emotions, you change your mindset, and you start to adopt strategies and tactics that are kind of counterintuitive to what you're accustomed to, and you're open-minded to behaving differently than you normally would. Okay, it's like the movie Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, before he's allowed into training in the mystic arts, the other master gives him some advice, and it goes something like this. He basically says that, I once stood where you stood, and I was also disrespectful. And he says, might I give you some advice? Forget everything you know. Okay. When you go to China, forget everything you know, because your myopia, your preconceived notions of how things should work, those are the things that are preventing you from developing real Guanxi relationships, which ultimately translate into employees that are more loyal and partners that are more productive. All right, so that's the end of this rant. Hope you enjoyed it. I think it went pretty well. I may just take it and post it So you're going to be able to see this as a video or as a podcast. All right, good job.